A lone rancher discovers a bound woman left to die in the desert. But saving her life is only the beginning, because falling in love with her will challenge everything he believed about second chances and the redemptive power of unexpected love.
Subscribe to Wild Sky Stories. Turn on the bell icon so you can do not miss any new video.
The summer of 1879 burned across the Arizona territory like a fever that refused to break. Dust devils twisted across the flatlands, and the sky stretched endlessly blue above the red rock formations that stood like ancient sentinels guarding secrets older than memory. Caleb Morgan rode his buckskin mare through the canyon pass, his worn leather hat pulled low against the merciless sun. He was a man of 32 winters, each one etched in the weathered lines around his eyes. His ranch lay 3 miles east, modest but honest, built with his own hands after the war had taken everything else from him. His brother, his faith in humanity, and nearly his will to continue. He heard her before he saw her. The sound rose from behind a cluster of boulders near the dried creek bed, a desperate, muffled cry that made his blood run cold. Caleb pulled his horse to a stop, his hand instinctively moving to the pistol at his hip. He had learned during his years in this unforgiving land that trouble often wore many faces. He dismounted quietly, his boots barely making a sound against the parched earth as he approached. What he found stopped his heart mid-beat. A woman lay on the ground, her hands bound behind her back with rough rope that had already rubbed her wrists raw. A burlap sack covered her head, tied loosely around her neck, and she thrashed weakly against her restraints. Her dress, once fine blue cotton, was torn and filthy with dust. "I can't breathe," she gasped, her voice barely a whisper now, exhausted from what must have been hours of struggle. "Please, I can't breathe." Caleb dropped to his knees beside her, his hands trembling as he carefully untied the cloth from around her throat. When he pulled the burlap away from her face, what he saw beneath the cloth stilled him completely. She was beautiful in a way that made the desert seem less harsh. Dark hair, tangled and matted with sweat, framed a face of delicate features now streaked with dirt and tears. But it was her eyes that captured him, large and green as spring grass, filled with terror that slowly shifted to desperate hope as she focused on his face. "You're safe now," Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion he hadn't expected to feel. "I've got you." He cut the ropes binding her wrists with his knife, wincing at the angry red marks they left behind. She drew in great gulping breaths of air, her entire body shaking with relief and exhaustion. "They left me," she managed between breaths. "The men who took me from the stagecoach. They argued about the ransom, then they just left me here to die." Caleb helped her sit up slowly, supporting her shoulders with one strong arm. "How long have you been out here?" "Since yesterday morning. I stopped counting the hours when the sun went down." A sob escaped her cracked lips. "I thought no one would find me. I thought I would die here alone." "You're not alone anymore," Caleb said firmly. He pulled his canteen from his belt and held it to her lips. "Drink slowly now. Small sips." She obeyed, her trembling hands wrapping around his as she guided the water to her mouth. The simple touch sent an unexpected current through Caleb's chest, a feeling he had buried so deep he had forgotten it existed. "My name is Charlotte," she said after the water had restored some of her strength. "Charlotte Whitmore. My father owns the bank in Prescott. Caleb Morgan. My ranch is a few miles from here. Can you ride?" She nodded weakly, and Caleb lifted her onto his horse as gently as if she were made of glass. He climbed up behind her, one arm wrapped protectively around her waist to keep her steady. As they rode toward his homestead, her head gradually came to rest against his shoulder, and he felt something crack open inside him, something he had kept locked away since the day he had buried his brother beneath a wooden cross on a battlefield far from home. The following weeks unfolded like pages in a book Caleb had never expected to read. He sent word to Charlotte's father in Prescott, but a reply came back that surprised them both. The town had flooded from summer storms, the roads were impassable, and it would be at least a month before anyone could make the journey to retrieve her. Charlotte insisted on earning her keep despite Caleb's protests. She cooked meals that transformed his lonely table into something warm and welcoming. She mended his shirts with neat, careful stitches. She learned to feed the chickens and tend the small vegetable garden behind the house. And slowly, conversation by conversation, meal by meal, Caleb found himself falling into something he had never believed would happen to him again. He learned that Charlotte had been traveling to visit her aunt when the outlaws had attacked the stagecoach. He learned that her mother had died when she was young, that she had spent her life trying to please a father who measured everything in dollars and success, that she had never felt truly free until she had watched the sunset paint the desert sky in shades of orange and purple from his porch. "It's strange," she said one evening as they sat together watching the stars emerge from the darkening sky. "I spent my whole life in comfortable parlors and fancy dresses, and I never felt as alive as I do right now. Here, in the middle of nowhere, with dust in my hair and calluses on my hands." Caleb looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the frightened victim he had rescued, but a woman of remarkable strength who had transformed his solitary existence into something worth waking up for. "You could stay," he said quietly, the words escaping before he could stop them. He immediately looked away, embarrassed by his own boldness. "I mean, if you wanted to. I know it's not much compared to what you're used to, Caleb." Her hand found his in the darkness, her fingers intertwining with his rough, work-worn ones. "Look at me." He turned, and in the moonlight, her eyes held something that made his breath catch in his throat. "When I was lying in that canyon, thinking I was going to die, I made a promise to myself," Charlotte said softly. "I promised that if I survived, I would stop living for everyone else's expectations. I would find what made me happy and hold on to it with everything I had." "And what makes you happy?" Caleb asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "This," she said simply. "Here, you." He kissed her then beneath the vast canopy of stars, with the scent of sage and wildflowers perfuming the night air. It was a kiss that spoke of second chances and unexpected grace, of two broken people finding wholeness in each other's arms. But their newfound happiness was not destined to remain unchallenged. Charlotte's father arrived 3 weeks later, his expensive suit looking absurdly out of place against the rugged landscape. Henry Whitmore was a large man with a commanding presence and the cold eyes of someone who had learned to view the world through the lens of profit and loss. "Charlotte, gather your things," he commanded without preamble, barely glancing at Caleb. "I've arranged a carriage to take us back to Prescott. You've been gone far too long and people are talking." "Father, I need to tell you something," Charlotte said, standing her ground on the porch, her chin lifted in a gesture of defiance that made Caleb's heart swell with pride. "Whatever it is can wait. We're leaving with in the hour. I'm not leaving." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush stone. Henry Whitmore turned slowly to face his daughter, his expression darkening like storm clouds gathering over the mountains. "What did you say?" "I'm staying here, Father, with Caleb." Charlotte reached for Caleb's hand and he stepped forward to stand beside her. "I love him, and he loves me. We're going to be married." Henry's face flushed red with anger. "You would throw away everything, your position, your inheritance, your future, for a dirt farmer in the middle of the wilderness? Have you lost your mind?" "I found it," Charlotte replied calmly. "For the first time in my life, I know exactly what I want and who I want to be. I'm sorry if that disappoints you, Father, but this is my choice to make. If you stay here, you'll get nothing from me, not a single cent. I don't want your money, I never did." Charlotte's voice softened with genuine compassion. "I wanted you to see me, to love me for who I am, not for how well I could perform the role of a banker's proper daughter. I hope someday you can understand that." Henry Whitmore stood rigid for a long moment, his jaw working as he struggled with emotions he clearly wasn't accustomed to feeling. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back to his waiting carriage. Caleb wrapped his arm around Charlotte as they watched her father drive away, her body trembling against his. But when she looked up at him, her eyes were dry and her smile was genuine. "No regrets?" he asked softly. "None," she answered. "Only gratitude. For that canyon, for you, for this strange, beautiful path that led me exactly where I needed to be." They were married in autumn, when the desert heat had mellowed into warmth and the cottonwood trees blazed gold along the creek beds. The ceremony was simple: a traveling preacher, a handful of neighboring ranchers who had become friends, and a sunset that painted the sky in colors so beautiful they seemed created specifically for the occasion. Charlotte wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric bought at the general store in town. Caleb wore his cleanest shirt and the expression of a man who couldn't quite believe his own fortune. When they spoke their vows, their voices carried across the desert like a prayer answered. That winter was harsh, but they faced it together. They weathered storms that howled around their small homestead, huddled together beneath quilts while wind shrieked outside. They celebrated Christmas with a small tree decorated with ribbons and a feast of roasted hen and potatoes. They talked through long nights about dreams and fears, about the children they hoped to have, about the life they were building from scratch. Spring arrived with wildflowers that carpeted the desert floor in purple and yellow, and with a letter that Charlotte read 3 times before she believed it. Her father had written. The words were stiff and formal, clearly difficult for him to compose, but the message was clear. He had been wrong. He had spent his life accumulating wealth while neglecting the only treasure that truly mattered, his daughter's happiness. He was an old man now, and life was too short for pride. The letter ended with a request. Might he come visit? Might he meet the man who had captured his daughter's heart? Might he perhaps find some small place in her life again? Charlotte cried as Caleb held her, but they were tears of joy and healing and hope. Henry Whitmore returned to the ranch in early summer, a different man than the one who had stormed away months before. He stayed for a week, sleeping in the small guest room, eating meals at their humble table, and gradually learning to see the richness that existed beyond bank account and social standing. On his last evening, Caleb found his father-in-law standing alone on the porch, watching the sun descend toward the distant mountains. "I was afraid she would die in that canyon," Henry said quietly, not looking at Caleb. "When word came about the abduction, I thought I had lost her forever, and I realized I had never really known her at all." "She's remarkable," Caleb agreed. "She is, and so it seems are you." Henry finally turned to face him. "You gave her something I never could, the freedom to become herself. I'm grateful to you for that, son." The word hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning and acceptance. Caleb extended his hand, and Henry took it firmly. "You're always welcome here," Caleb said. "This is your family now, too." Henry nodded, his eyes suspiciously bright. "I believe I'll take you up on that." Years passed like the seasons themselves, predictable yet always carrying small surprises. Children came, 3 of them, filling the homestead with laughter and noise and the beautiful chaos of life fully lived. The ranch grew and prospered, not into vast wealth, but into the comfortable security of hard work rewarded. Charlotte never lost her wonder at the desert's beauty, never stopped finding joy in the simple rhythms of their days, and Caleb never stopped thanking whatever providence had led him to that canyon on that burning summer day. One evening, many years later, they sat together on the same porch where they had first declared their love. Their hair had grayed, their hands had weathered, but the tenderness between them remained as fresh as morning dew. "Do you remember what you said to me?" Charlotte asked softly. "That first night, under the stars?" "I remember everything about that night," Caleb replied, taking her hand in his. "Every word, every moment. You gave me back my breath," she said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "In that canyon, I thought I would suffocate. But you didn't just remove the cloth, Caleb. You gave me room to breathe for the rest of my life." He kissed her forehead gently, tasting the salt of grateful tears. and you gave me something to breathe for. Around them, the desert stretched into forever, unchanged yet eternally new. Inside their home, grandchildren slept peacefully in rooms that had witnessed generations of love. And on that weathered porch, two souls who had found each other against impossible odds sat together in the gathering twilight, their hearts still full, their story continuing with every breath they shared. Some loves are born in parlors and ballrooms, in arranged meetings and calculated unions. But the truest loves, the ones that endure beyond all reason, are often born in the most unexpected places. In dusty canyons, in desperate moments, in the simple act of one human being reaching out to save another. And those loves, once kindled, burn eternal.